I'm going to attempt to address something that kind of irks me, to be honest with you, from a defensive standpoint, and it's when certain players that are in the draft or that are going to be looked at as being drafted really highly are called overrated or said there's a lack of production, and that's usually code for one statistic, sacks, and I challenge that assumption that only sacks count as production, specifically when it comes to the Georgia players. The two biggest ones, Travon Walker and Jordan Davis for me. But as it relates to other players as well, maybe you could extrapolate this to other positions, guys that are going to be drafted. I think it really applies to Davis and Walker for a lot of reasons. The system that Georgia ran defensively was an atypical system. Now, this is a Ravens channel, so people will understand this reference, but there might be some pushback from people who watch this video and are not Ravens fans. The Georgia system was somewhat similar to the Ravens system in that it didn't want anyone to generate 10, 12, 14 sacks in a season. Now, that's very difficult to do in college football, but what you have here on the left, over on this side, is Georgia's team defense stats for 2020. And then over on this side, on the right, is Georgia's team defense stats for 2021. So a couple things we want to notice first. First, games played. You see they played 15 games because they played and won the national title. 2020 obviously was impacted by the pandemic and multiple games canceled for dozens of teams across the country in multiple sports. So there's going to be a clear difference in the number of sacks there. Let's point out an anomaly first. You have 9.5 sacks right there by a guy who was drafted, and played pretty well this year too. So you're not gonna get any argument from me that it's possible to have a high number of sacks. But I offer to you, if you just look at the stats, and I'm not a huge stats guy. Look at the stats here. You have a wide distribution of sacks in both seasons. Now, I have done a poor job of creating my graphic here. So down here at the bottom, off screen, is Travon Walker from 2020. And what it says is 7 games played, 2 tackles for loss, and 1 sack. And so let's compare that to Travon Walker over here in 2021. Twice as many games played, essentially, 13 games played. He only played 7 in 2020. 6 sacks, 7.5 tackles for loss. I will admit that's not extremely high level of production, especially if you compare it to this season right here. Does that mean that he's overrated? Hell no. Travon Walker can play. Many of us commenting on where Travon Walker should go, on his lack of pass rush. A lot of us don't understand the stunts, myself included. The stunts that are being run, certain times he's reading a tackle's reaction, and he may have to go down a gap if the tackle sets if it's a certain protection scheme. And I'm talking about slide protection or big on big or a couple of other things that are available for offensive linemen. But there's stunts that they do, I'm not going to go into them, where Travon Walker's being asked to do what's called read on the run. So if the tackle goes down, then he might rush and then fit inside of the next guy who's picking him up. If the tackle doesn't go down, then he's got to use an inside move. That will delay you, guys. That will delay you. If you watched my video on Brandon Stevens, where I was talking about him having a read out blitz on that 4th and 11 against the Bears, my video that premiered last night, there's an instant react. There's a moment of delay there before he can react because he's got to read something and then react. So some of the things that Travon Walker was asked to do when he did play on the edge are not going to be necessarily the way he's asked to do them on a 3rd and 12. And even on 3rd and long, Georgia was bringing some unique, interesting, and intricate pressure schemes. Look, Nakobe Dean had 6 sacks, and this includes stats from the college football playoff. He had 6 sacks in 2011. So there's a lot of guys who had 4+ or even 3+ sacks. Look, Jalen Carter might be the best player on this defense when it comes down to it. When you look 6 or 8 years from now in the future, he may be the best player, best prospect on the defense. Next year, I'm going to be interested to see how many sacks he has for Georgia. And he's number 88, D tackle. He's not in the draft this year. Devonte Wyatt and Jordan Davis are. But it's going to be interesting to me to see what happens for Jalen Carter next year. If he only gets 2 or 3 or 4 sacks, are they going to say the same shit about him that they're saying about Jordan Davis? If you've played any level of sports, and I'm talking basketball and football primarily, can't really extrapolate it to wrestling because generally people are the same height if they're in the same weight class for wrestling. Boxing, mixed martial arts, that holds somewhat true. Basketball and football have a really wide array or wide range of the heights of people because you have such disparate skills at different positions. If you've ever played basketball against a 7-foot center, and I have, it makes the shit impossible to get a shot off inside 6 or 8 feet. It kind of takes away some of your offense. A huge, powerful, explosive defensive tackle does the same thing in football. Does the same thing. And for them to say he doesn't have production. Okay, he had 2 sacks this past year as a senior. Oh, he had 1 sack as a junior. Got it. Understood. So what do you say about Jermaine Johnson? Jermaine Johnson had 5 in 7 games. And then he left. And then he had 11 in Florida's system. Here's my point. It's possible, and I think it's true, that Georgia's structure did not want anyone to have 11 sacks. Am I saying that's why Jermaine Johnson left? Well, no, that's silly. That's silly. But I offer to you that there's certain guys, defensive line-wise, who might be better pros in terms of sacks. Or maybe over a 4-year period on a rookie contract, maybe Travon Walker gives you something like this. 8 sacks as a rookie. 13 in his second year. 9 his third year. And 11 his fourth year. Is that bad? Is it bad now to have double-digit sacks be your range? No, it's not bad. Even I know it's a 17-game season, but if you want to sit here and say that the only production that matters is sacks, you're just wrong. And what you're kind of doing is you're kind of telling everybody else, hey, tell me you really don't know defensive football without telling me you don't know defensive football. Because what Georgia did oftentimes was be unpredictable by bringing and blitzing certain guys. Now let's be specific about Travon Walker, and well, I'm gonna hold off on Travon Walker and Jordan Davis. Get to them in a moment. What I want to get to first is some stats, and I'm not a huge stat guy, but this is where I'm gonna go with this. So Nakobe Dean, Travon Walker, and Nolan Smith. Let's look at the sacks. All right, you got a shit ton of games played by Nakobe Dean in 3 years. I believe he earned his college degree in 3 years too, by the way. I'm not sure about Travon Walker, but 3 years played for Travon Walker. 3 years played for Nolan Smith, who I do not believe is in the draft. You got 7.5 sacks for Nakobe Dean. He's an inside linebacker. Only 9.5 for Travon Walker. He's a quote edge player. Well, some of you guys don't even understand. He's half the time he's playing inside shade on a tackle. That's not an edge player. That's not. Travon Walker might end up being a 4-3 DN, depending on who he gets drafted by. Okay? And people, I don't even like the term edge for real. It's either an outside linebacker or a DN. Get it right, okay? But for the purposes of quick communication and efficiency, I understand people like to use the term edge, but all edge players are not the same. Cameron Thomas, who might be a second, third round pick, is not an edge player. He's not. He's a defensive end and maybe a D tackle in certain looks. He's not an edge player. He's not an outside linebacker. He'd be an edge player in a 4-3, but not in a 3-4. There's a difference, of technique, and there's a difference in what you're asked to do, even though you are aligned in a 9 technique sometimes. So in any case, did Nakobe Dean have a bad season as a sophomore? Because he only had 1.5 sacks, and then he had a monster, amazing season as a junior? No, he's a great football player. He was a damn good football player in 2020. Look at the games played. I think they went 8-2, so they weren't as good. Georgia's defense was a historically good defense in 2021, period. One of the greatest defenses in the history of college football, if not the greatest. But if you look at his production, 10.5 tackles for loss, only 13.5 in his career. So then let's extrapolate that to Travon Walker, who could be the number 1 pick in the draft right here. And I'm going to compare him to Aiden Hutchinson in a moment. He only had 13 tackles for loss. Well, Nolan Smith matches his stats. Hopefully I didn't copy the same stats there. No, I didn't. Okay. Correct me if you find where I made an error, please let me know. I copied and pasted some of this and created a little graphic. Nolan Smith, you probably haven't heard his name said in a long time. Travon Walker might be the number 1 pick in the NFL draft. The production is the same in terms of tackles for loss, in terms of sacks. Oh, hold on a second. Look at the tackles. And unless I have it wrong, I believe Nolan Smith played boundary side outside linebacker in Georgia's system. So he took a lot of pass drops, still made 92 tackles. Does that mean Nolan Smith is better than Travon Walker? No. My point to you is some of you people who are saying Travon Walker's overrated, and there's not as many of you saying that as are saying Jordan Davis is overrated, which is dumb in both cases. You don't understand what Travon Walker was asked to do in Georgia's defense. Look at Aiden Hutchinson and David Ojapo's film. They were allowed to rush off the edge consistently and attack. Travon Walker was not allowed that. I offer to you that if you took Travon Walker last year and Aiden Hutchinson and had them switch teams, they may put up the same exact stats, meaning Aiden Hutchinson might have only had 6 or no, I firmly believe he probably would have had more. He might have had 6 or 8 or 10 sacks. And Travon Walker might go up there to Michigan and he might give you a 13, 15 sack season, something like that, because of the system. And this does relate to Ravens content. It does. Because we believe that the edge players, outside linebackers for the Ravens, have consistently been held down in terms of their sack numbers. Look at Matthew Judon. Look at what some of the things Ngakoue said. Now, I know he's moved on from the Raiders already, but there's been other guys who have moved on. Zadarius Smith, right? Zadarius Smith, another perfect example. We believe that Bowser and Owe are going to have more sacks this year. Why? Mike McDonald's system lets them attack. He's going to let the outside linebackers attack, specifically when you're in your nickel look. Georgia didn't do that. Maybe I'll do another video. I'm not going to show College All-22 film. I'm not going to go down that road again. But Georgia's defense was one that asked those guys to slant and stunt. Sometimes they'd have to stunt down one gap. Hell, sometimes they have to long stick and line up in the C gap and long stick down into the A gap so so 2 other guys could rush off the edge. I offer to you that if you're one of those people who thinks sacks is the only thing that matters, you really need to reevaluate the things you're looking at. It doesn't matter for Travon Walker. Nakobe Dean, I mean, he had an unbelievable season here. I'm not saying that, his sophomore year and junior year was the same stats, but he's a similar football player in these 2 seasons. Travon Walker is probably a similar football player here. He just didn't get as many reps. He was behind Ojulari, or however you say his name, the guy that had, 9.5 sacks in 2020. So if I'm rambling and not making my point clear, these guys are not overrated. They're not. They're not overrated just because they're not giving you 12 sacks in a college season. They may not give you 12 sacks in the NFL. Jordan Davis and Devonte Wyatt, 2 different players. They're not going to give you 10 or 12 sacks. That's just not going to happen. There's not a whole lot of Warren Sapps out there, guys. Even the guy from Tampa Bay, Vita Vea, I think, hopefully I'm saying that right. He's not a huge sack guy, but he's disruptive as hell. Let's look at stats for these guys. Now, I said this before. Jalen Carter might be the best player. He might end up being the best player on the defense. He's a sophomore, had 3 sacks last year, 8.5 tackles for loss. By the way, more than Jordan Davis, more than Devonte Wyatt. Okay? Didn't have a sack as a freshman. Still was productive. They have a system at Georgia. And these guys fit into that system. And when they move to the pros, they'll have a different system. To say that Jordan Davis is not a top 10 pick, I don't know what film you're watching. I don't. If you watch the film, you can see it. Now, these stats, okay, maybe they're not great, but how many tackles for loss did Travon Walker have in 3 seasons? I think it was 13.5, and he had 9.5 sacks, and he's supposedly an edge player, according to many of you who say Jordan Davis can't rush the passer. Davis gave you 7 sacks. Travon Walker gave you 9.5. I guarantee you Travon Walker had more opportunities for two reasons. Number one, he actually did get to rush off the edge some. Jordan Davis never did. Number two, he apparently played more snaps. If Jordan Davis plays, if there's let's put it this way, if there's 75 defensive snaps in a game, put in the comment section how many you think Jordan Davis will play in a typical NFL game. At not even thinking about the score, who's winning the game, etc. My impression, Jordan Davis is going to play at least 65, 70, 72% of the plays, somewhere around there. You're going to have some 3rd and 15s where you don't need him on the field at all. Now, look, having said that, I've seen plays of him where they run a screen opposite from him, and he gets in and makes the tackle. He's a freak athlete. He just happens to be 6'6", 340. Well, they say he's 340. By the way, I'm not sure if you noticed he was in the Heisman voting. I mean, how do you even tell your grandkids about that when you're 6'6"? He'll be, probably 350 pounds at that point when he's in his 50s or 60s or whatever. How do you tell them, like, hey, I was in the Heisman voting? Who the hell is in the Heisman voting as a D tackle? I don't remember who. Devonte Wyatt, only 2.5 sacks this year. He'll be a first-round pick. If he's not, it's because of the character stuff, which I'm not even paying attention to, especially when it comes this late in the situation. When you get 6 to 7 days before the draft and some of this stuff starts coming out from some of these reporters who've never talked to these young men, I always question those things, and I look at it skeptically. If there's a serious behavioral issue that has done harm to people, obviously you have to take that seriously. But my point is, I find it really interesting that some of these stories come out at a national level, late in the game as the draft, is approaching. In any case, Devonte Wyatt, 2.5 sacks, 7 tackles for loss. These 3 guys are all potential-wise, they're all potential all-pros. Jordan Davis is a mountain, can't be moved, period. He can put people on train tracks and just move them. Devonte Wyatt's a little bit of a different type of player. He's a line up in his gap and go, attack, get off the ball quick. A little bit more fast twitch than Jordan Davis. You can see a little bit of the size difference here. To me, Jalen Carter's a little bit of both. Jalen Carter could damn near play 5 technique, in a 4-3 structure. He could damn near, he's that athletic. And these 2 guys are great athletes as well, not disputing that. What's my point overall? Look, guys, if you're the type of person who thinks that this number right here and this number right here mean that those guys should not be looked at as top 8, 12, 15 picks potentially, I don't know that I can converse with you about football for real. Because there's more guys like these across the country than there are top edge rushers. There's more guys, not Jordan Davis, but there's more guys who can do what's asked of them at D tackle than there are guys who can do what's asked of them as an edge pass rusher. Those guys are very difficult to find. The paradigm, the job requirements for those people is extremely demanding, and you're just not going to find a whole hell of a lot of them. So I guess I understand it. People saying, is Travon Walker, does he fit with Aiden Hutchinson? He did not get the pass rush opportunities the same way that Aiden Hutchinson did. He did not. That is a fact. If you look at how Georgia's defense was structured and how they tried to be unpredictable, and they had so many athletes, and they're smart because of the things they have to read on the run, some of the things they had to do, incredibly impressive. I've talked for a long time about this. Maybe I haven't made my points clear. I did not write down any of my thoughts here before. I just wanted to just speak on it. I thought it was something worth mentioning because I think it's a little insulting to some of these guys to say that just because they don't have sacks, you don't know what production is because you don't know the calls. Now, we can look at the film and we can take a guess about what the calls were, but this is a historic defense. Possibly the greatest defense of all time in college football history. That matters. That means that they played team defense, they played within the structure, and I would say that probably 95% of these guys are absolute team players who will execute their technique, even if it means, hey, that might take me out of the play. And I don't know who those other 5% guys are who weren't bought in. I'm not naming names because I don't know who they are. I'm just saying the overwhelming majority of Georgia's defensive players are cream of the crop, ready to play guys. And I think it's insulting. And it says more about us as fans, for real, than it does about those players that we think it's only one stat that matters, and that's sacks in the context of being a defensive player. Because there's a whole hell of a lot more that goes into it than just that.